Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn session, Turning Your Journey Map into a Roadmap, presented by ROI Healthcare Solutions. My name is Brent Prosser. I'm responsible for sales and business development with ROI, and I'm going to be kicking us off. So whether you've had a journey map created maybe by Infor, or you're just kind of trying to figure out how are you going to get to where you want to be, how are you going to get to the future of ERP solutions in your organization? What's that look like? How do you get there? This is a session for you. You're in the right place. That's really what we're going to focus on today. It's how to get through that process. We're going to take you through how to create a strategic and tactical roadmap to drive your technology initiatives forward. You're going to learn what you can do today to start preparing for these new technologies, and we're going to share some wisdom and experiences that we've had to help you uncover the best practices for implementing the Infor CloudSuite solutions. So the presenters today are going to be two key people for ROI. Donna Booth, who's responsible for finance and supply chain management strategic services, and Diana Van Blaricom, her counterpart, who is responsible for HCM strategic services. And really their mission in life and the mission of their teams in life is to help organizations like you all reach peak operational efficiencies and really instill a model of continuous improvement by using Infor's contemporary technology tools, and as well as things that we know are coming down the pipe from Infor. So I know that there are, kind of a variety of people on the call here. There are some organizations that know us pretty well, some organizations who are getting to know us, and some organizations who don't really know us at all. So I thought it'd be a good idea to spend a minute or two just really talking about who we are and what we do. So ROI has been around since 1999. We've been in the Infor business since 2010. If you look at the bullet points on the right-hand side of the slide, that gives you an idea of the type of services that we provide. We have, obviously the Infor business is one of the primary areas of focus for ROI. Infor is the only ERP that we work with. We also have a practice that focuses on EHR implementation work and rev cycle optimization work. But when you think about our Infor business, right now, 70, 75% of the work that we do is connected to CloudSuite in some way. It's either organizations that are in the same place you are, trying to figure out how do you get to where you want to be in the cloud. We work with organizations like that to help develop roadmaps for the future. We work with organizations to implement their CloudSuite software, both finance, supply chain, and HCM. And every once in a while, we get brought in to kind of fix something that wasn't implemented right in the first place, maybe by another partner or something. But they're live on CloudSuite already, and they need some help getting it straightened out to work in the way that they want it to work. So we do some remediation work as well. The balance of the work that we do in the Infor world is with version 10 clients, things like application managed support. Maybe a client isn't ready to go to the cloud yet, but they've got some things that they wanted to work on to improve the efficiency of how they use the products they have. So we work with them on optimizing the approach that they have there. You can see a lot of logos at the bottom and top of the slide. We've developed a reputation over time of on-time delivery, on-budget delivery, maniacal focus on quality, getting it done right the first time, and that's evidenced certainly by the reputation and the scores that we have from our clients with KLAS. Category leader for a few years running here. And then most recently, what we're very proud of, and this just happened on Tuesday, we were named the 2020 Growth Partner of the Year by Infor and Inforum for North America. And that's not just for healthcare. That's looking at partners across all the industries that that Infor does business with in North America. So very proud of that, and they're very proud of the reputation that we've developed over the years. Before I transition to Diana and Donna, just one housekeeping thought here. We have a chat feature in the webinar facility. You all are on mute. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, anything you'd like to bring out in the open, please enter those through the chat facility. We're going to be keeping track of those, and we'll be doing a Q&A session at the end of the hour. So with that, I'll turn it over to Diana and Donna. Take it away.
Thanks, Brent. Hey, it's Diana here. yeah, just encourage you to add questions along the way. We may pick some of those up along the way, and we've got some time at the end for a dialogue. So welcome. Today's agenda, we're going to hit on a couple different topics here. We're going to start out by talking about this whole measuring concept, right? Everyone's talking about benchmarking and metrics and all kinds of analysis. And we want to talk a little bit about the importance of how do you go about benchmarking and being able to measure up, but focusing within as well. So Donna and I will talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to talk about the secret to success, right? How do you identify the secret to success, and what is the secret to moving to the cloud? So, of course, joining me, Donna Booth, my other half, compatriot. Donna, you want to say hi?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. Well, thank you, Diana. I think what's really important in this next agenda item, there are a lot of folks on the line that have a tremendous amount of experience, right? We've been doing this for a long time. And now we need to understand what are those do's and don'ts for moving to the cloud? What works and what doesn't work? And really, what can you expect? I think the last agenda item, it's very important. And once again, it's that he said, she said. We always talk about roles and responsibilities, but we want to do this in a positive way so that folks understand what are the expectations. What does it mean for me as an organization? But more importantly, what does it mean for me as an individual that would be transacting in the new world within the cloud? And if you think about it, we want to know, how do we do this? What's involved? And we really want to stay away from those questions of the why and the who that really instill fear as we take this journey.
Thanks, Donna. So let's start out talking about benchmarking, right? And how do you measure up? I think one of the intriguing factors about moving to a new technology is we're starting to see, I think in the HR world, we've been talking about HR metrics and, for over a decade. And we haven't really been able to do it because we were lacking the databases and the tools, right? It was all a great concept, but it was very difficult. And it took so much time to try to figure out what you were doing, and it was so painful that you were like, please don't make me do that again. And now it's really easy with all these tools that we have. And so we're hearing a lot about benchmarking metrics, what are we doing? But I think it nets out to not only measuring yourself to others for some competitive insight, but having data to be able to have facts that show what's really happening in your organization, right? You'll hear people say, I think we're improving in these areas, but if you have the right metrics, you now have the facts to back it up, right? So a person without facts is just another person with an opinion, right? My best phrase I ever heard from anybody I have clients that I've worked with. And I think it's really an understanding of, there's this concept of best practice versus the right practice. So Donna, do you want to impart a little bit about, we get into the finance and supply chain side and analytics and kind of this whole concept of operational excellence. What are your thoughts on metrics?
Yeah, no, great concept. We love metrics. Everybody wants to be measured by metrics. And we know that the messaging from Infor is, how do we realize the value sooner moving to the cloud, right? How do we move our solutions faster and deploy faster, right? How do we extend past those traditional long engagements? So the first thing that we need to do is, once again, look at those areas that are very tactical, that are right in front of you. The average cost, right, to raise a purchase order in healthcare as it sits right now is $202 from the time that you requisition, from the time that you issue that purchase order. For our public sector customers, that may increase to about $360. So once again, how do we find these metrics that are tangible in front of us right now with the systems that we already own? And then how can we develop the plan in order to measure it forward? Our executives always come back and say, okay, well, this is great. You want to move to the cloud. We want to deploy new systems. We want to look at what it takes to come off of our legacy systems, but what's my total cost of ownership? What is the ROI? What's the value in doing this? And I think it's our job, in order to get that tangible facts in front of us, so that we can present something that's realistic. Now, as an example, right, everyone comes back and they look at their financial close process and they always say, okay, well, if we want to continue along the lines of continuous accounting, it means we should be closing every single day, and we should be able to reduce our close process by maybe 30 or 40%. But once again, we have to look at those metrics and best practice, not only to how we process, but to the organization itself, so that you realize the right metric, so that you aren't held accountable to a metric that you were never able to achieve in the first place because it wasn't benchmarked specifically to what you do in your organization. And I think that's pretty critical. Nobody wants to set a goal in a go live or a deployment that you can't reach. So it's a matter of being realistic.
Yeah, that's the key, I think, is understanding what metrics to use and when they're appropriate too. You know, a lot of the leaders that we work with, they want to know how you measure up. And I always tell people that it's the way you get your project funded is to be able to say, here are our organizational objectives, and here's how our HR programs or our efforts align to helping deliver on those, right? Because it takes people to be able to deliver on those. But we really can't say, hey, things are working or not working unless we have data. So, you know, if you keep tabs on the CEO Challenge Report, I think that's one of the really interesting things, because they do a worldwide survey of what's on the minds of the CEOs. And you have to be prepared to answer their questions, right? They usually have a lot of pressing questions around operational issues. And if you want to know what they're wondering, this report is a great place to start. They update it annually, and it's got a nice little summary of what's on the mind of those organizational leaders in different categories. And so the top three, I think, are always the most telling, right? So our top three challenges, and we've seen the first one here consistently across the board, is that there is a talent shortage, right? That continued and growing talent shortage. And even in the midst of 2020 and everything that's happened, and a lot of folks who may be in a position to find a new job, we have to find the right talent. So it really bodes to that whole talent management message, right, of having the right people in the right place. You have to be able to deal with disruptive technologies, right, and shifting customer preferences. And I think we've seen, you know, some of the disruptive things. I consider Apple disruptive because, you know, there was a time where, hey, we had our little Blackberries and we thought we were cool. And, you know, they put these things in your hand that you can talk to, and it gives you directions and finds things for you. And our life changed immediately. And now we're seeing that with a lot of the ERP and operational tools that we have, where I can be in the warehouse and on my mobile device, or I can be in a meeting and I'm looking at my top performers and we're talking about, you know, standing up a new location or expanding our business, and who are those leaders that we can put in those roles. All of that can come from the palm of your hand right now. So it is a disruptive technology, but in a good way, right? And I think the most important thing that's on everybody's brain, whether it's personal or professional, is of course managing costs. And how do you move forward with the plans that you want to make given limited funding that you might be experiencing, and really just operating smart, right? Making sure that you're using your dollars wisely when you get into these projects. You know, anytime that you're replacing ERP or any large technologies, they can be expensive. And so you want to make sure that you're doing it right, and you're doing it right the first time.
Yeah. And I think that's very important. I'm just going to jump in. You know, I feel very strongly about this and why we want to stay connected in our program with managing to the talent shortage, right? As an example, in supply management, even as of 2020, particularly in healthcare, the average cost of monies that we spend to empower our users, right, through training is less than $500 per FTE count. That's a pretty sad commentary if we think about it. We have this disruptive technology that's meant to create new markets for us. However, we don't empower our people to hone their talents and create new opportunities within that market. These are bright people, and they may be people in organizations that have been there a long time, but they've never been given the opportunity. And I think that's very important. And it really, comes along the line, the minds of IT, right, Diana? I think this is so critical.
Oh, yeah.
Cloud is new technology. So how do we manage to that?
And that means all of the IT folks have to learn some new tools too, right? So it's really looking at, I call it staring at the lion in the face, right? Yes, you've got to do this, but how are you going to do it? And it really comes down to making sure that we're focusing on, we talk about all three areas, right? People, process, technology, but, having an understanding of where you start, and that's good planning. It's understanding your roadmap and what makes sense. There's what makes sense, and there's what makes sense for your organization. And then making sure that you don't forget about the folks who are going to be supporting these systems. So like you said, we are not spending the dollars to train supply chain people. We're not spending the dollars to train the IT folks who get to support all of these applications. And there's new technologies out there. And, just like your personal or professional licenses, you have to stay contemporary if you want to be able to leverage the investment. So, a lot of times when we talk to the CIOs, the directors of technology, and the CHROs and the folks, and really the number one question is, how are we going to make all of this work? And then you factor in what happened this year and how are we going to make it all work from home? Because that's where we all are, right? So what we want to do today is really kind of walk through the things that you can think about, things you can, start help with your planning, tactical things that you can do, but also the strategic things that make or break these projects for you. So Donna, what is the secret to success?
Yeah, and before we jump into this, there was a very poignant study done by Forrester in 2019. And really, what was the driver? What are the concerns from a program perspective, from an IT perspective, from a leadership perspective? What are the biggest concerns about even moving to the cloud? What does that mean? Do you know that 34% of all respondents indicated their biggest concern was data security and privacy, right? How do we trust? How do we know that we have to do this? But when we look at the other concerns beneath the data security and privacy, it's pretty telling as to why we need cloud programs and what this means in the overall journey mapping and road mapping exercise. Folks indicated that, we've got data sitting in multiple databases. We cannot share information amongst our work streams or amongst the disparate technologies. But really the largest concern for folks about moving to the cloud, they want to move quicker because they understand that they're sitting on legacy systems. And that was a pretty significant number in that survey. And I think this is something that we want to look at overall that manages to the secret to our success. Diana and I laugh at this slide and we say, it looks pretty simple. We laugh at this and we say, there really isn't anything spectacular with what we do and how we manage these types of questions at ROI. We always have a propensity to talk about the journey map. The journey map means, right, we're talking about the product. What can the product do for us? What's the sequencing of the product? And we always make it very specific to the product, and we always make it very specific to the project. And that's great. We need to do that. But what we find, very simply, folks have a tendency to miss the program. And once again, that's a highlight. We talk about journey mapping specific to the product. What is the return on investment if I deploy a specific model or a module within talent management, right? Mm-hmm. What is the success if I deploy something specifically within finance, such as close and reconciliation? But yet, we don't talk about the program. And I think this is where the beauty of taking that very tactical journey map that is normally centered around product and what should be deployed when, and we tie it to the program. It truly is that simple. It's quite magical. I think the reason right. And I think the reason why we want to do this in the program, PMI, for those of you that are project management professionals, PMP myself, I love the structure. And we all have been kicking around the statistic for a while. And, we've been looking at this, why projects fail and the percentage of projects fail. And the perception is that they're always IT projects. Wrong perception, because they're not IT projects, right? And I think the other reason why they fail is because we don't incorporate the program. Most of those failed projects from PMI, in a very large survey that was done in 2020, this year, 39% said our projects failed simply because we had a change in organizational priorities. So that certainly isn't managing to the journey map or the product or the feature functionality of a product, right? It's managing to the program if we can't manage to that. And once again, I think this is the beauty in all of this.
Donna, let me give the folks that are joining us today a great example of that. So when we talk about managing to the program, when we look at the CloudSuite HCM portfolio, right? Lots of product, there's over 20 modules. What order do we do them in? Great. But think about from a higher level perspective, when people talk about talent acquisition, for example, we're going to put in this applicant tracking system. It's going to help the recruiters find the right people, that whole talent management message. But what I always tell the HR folks is take a step back and think about what it feels like. What does your overall program look like? So your product for your recruiting and onboarding, for example, is going to be talent acquisition and transition management. But think about it at a higher level, what that recruiting and onboarding experience is going to feel like for someone coming in from the outside and for someone moving in the organization, right? Internal mobility, huge initiative right now across a lot of organizations. So think about what those initiatives look like, what your overall strategy to those initiatives are. What does that program look like? And then map in your product. And then you'll know that you've met your business requirements. And again, not an IT project, right? This has to be coming from the folks who are leading those recruiting efforts in these organizations.
Yeah, so true. And I think, when we also look at CloudSuite financials and supply management, there's an awful lot of product that comes with that cloud offering. So once again, it's enabling the foundation. Where do you start with the foundation to build a successful framework so that you can then start to build the levels of your house? So as an example, a lot of folks raise their hand on the healthcare side, and they say, you know what, I want to get to close and reconciliation right out of the chute. I want to manage to those 300-400 bank accounts, and I want to reconcile. And you sit back and you ask the organizations, okay, how do you reconcile your cash right now? And a lot of them say, you know what, we reconcile cash to the EMR. We've never really reconciled cash to our ERP. Okay, that should be a heads up that we can deploy product, but if we have the wrong process up front, or if we have the wrong expectation of the program, you won't be successful or happy with the deployment of that product. So that's where we start to really dig into those very poignant questions. And once again, we do it in a way that we ask about the what and the how, as opposed to the why and the who. And it starts to open the hearts up of our executives. And I think, once again, we just keep it simple. And, Diana, you've done a segment in your ebook about SOS. And we joked about this term, I think you and I, maybe 10 years ago, SOS, shiny object syndrome. We always want to get to here and now, right? The shiny object. We want to get to it here and now, but we forget our fundamental basics of why we're here and building out the program first.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people that are really disappointed by the bright, shiny object. And even though, the screaming weasel looks really cool, at the end of the day, it's really about, for HR, it's really about managing people and making sure that they're in the right place and they're getting paid the correct amount. Operationally in finance and supply chain, we've got to get those supplies moved. When COVID happened, I think we saw the supply chain effort was heroic in some cases, right? So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that go into the program and strategy. where we can start looking at some of these things ahead of our project?
Absolutely. Once again, we define the program as it's that foundation and governance, right, of your ERP, enterprise application support, and methodology. If you notice, I didn't say methodology because you can have more than one methodology, and we really need to be embracing and accepting of that. Really, I think one of the largest wins that we have in that strategy and program, before I walk through each one of these, Diana and I laugh about this one as well. It's bolded for a reason. It's called Rise Up, right? And I don't know if we can say it, but we're going to say it. We always joke and say, okay, come on, man up. We need to do this. So what does it mean to rise up? So yes, everyone has reports, interfaces, conversions, extensions. But what we really need to do is we have to look at the user preferences. So it's RICE plus the user preferences. And how do we identify those objects? And I think that is very critical in those CloudSuite applications themselves, but just to the program. We have pockets of personnel that have experience in ERPs, but maybe they don't have experience in mobility. Maybe they don't have experience, as Diana likens it, onboarding individuals to an organization that you're now able to do it with mobile applications. We might not have that experience amongst our finance team. What does it mean to manage to those user preferences? We're also adult learners in all of this. So the days of, right, PO20, HR11, AP 20, MA 43.3, we talk about those old form IDs and just really that old way of thinking. We now need to, in the user preference, change the dialogue, the expectation of what our users are expecting. They're expecting clean dashboards. They're expecting the day in the life of how do I do my job in one screen. They're expecting the ability to get to data. And I think what's really interesting with the program and moving to the cloud, it's not about just simply using applications. Moving to the cloud affords us the opportunity that our entire ERP solution really becomes the foundation for data. The ERP itself is the reporting mechanism and how we see it. And that's a very hard concept because we're so used to running reports and having hard output in front of us. And this is really a different way to think.
Yeah, it is. And real-time data too, right? You could be sitting in a meeting with your iPad or your phone and you're having a conversation about some initiative that's going on, or maybe there's an issue or some challenge that you're facing in your business, and being able to bring that stuff up in real time is huge.
Yeah. And, this is really funny, kind of going back to Diana, to the program itself. When we talk about that application topology mapping, and it's so funny, I have a nephew that is now going back for a second undergraduate degree in IT application and machine learning. And he said, you know what, Aunt Donna, I now have to take a class, a whole semester on topology mapping. Yay. And it's pretty interesting. He said, I don't understand why it's so important. Right? There are standards to this. These are things that we need to understand with the program. We often go into customers and the first thing they say is, I have no idea what systems we have. And a lot of people are afraid to admit this. And in reality, it's okay to raise your hand and say, hey, I need help with this as far as understanding what the program looks like. And better yet, I need help with identifying how do I put this on paper and conceptually, visually draw it out, because we are adult learners. I think the other thing too that we have to remember, you cannot forget about the organizational change management. It's the piece that folks never get around to, or they think that, well, we're good at it and we don't need to do it. But in reality, we might have been doing it or using it in our other solutions. our EMRs, as an example, where they might get 40, 50, 60, $80 million to deploy these large events in systems or other government systems. And yet, in ERP, we don't have that ability. We never get those budgets. And then we gloss over the organizational change management and what it means, not only to the organization, but the impact to the users. This is where you need to partner up with your folks on the human capital management side. The way that people do work will change. And if we have to, and we'll talk about what you can do right now with the product, if we are going to be revisiting jobs and descriptions, well, let's revisit jobs and descriptions, not in the context of how do we deploy it within the application itself, but let's revisit it specifically to the program so that people understand what it means to them so they embrace the change. And I think that's huge. A lot of folks will say, finance and supply chain, right? I'm going to the cloud with CSF and I don't need global HR and I don't need human capital management.
Yeah.
Well, we have a shared resource profile.
We have it.
That's right. A resource, right? We have to deploy a resource profile. I need to include my HCM teams. This is very important to tie into the program.
Well, and Donna, too, to that point, too, is one of the things, we get into these planning sessions with folks, that realization of the dependency, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but if you are a user in CSF, you are a resource in GHR. So whether you're implementing HCM or you're just using CSF, you have to have a resource record to be a user. And if you're doing this in conjunction and if you're doing HCM and you have your jobs and positions and everything identified correctly, we can actually use that structure to help with the approvals over in finance and supply chain as well, because you're in a role and that role has that approval responsibility. So, the program, the overarching view, I think it's important for organizations to sit down and say, what do we want to look like? It's kind of like going on vacation, right? Do you just get in the car and drive? Well, sometimes, but it's a lot more effective if you think about where you want to go, right? Let's talk about products a little bit. Things that we can do from an optimization perspective.
Yep, and I think these are the things where we're currently now for our customers that are planning to move to CloudSuite or move to the cloud. What can they do now, and what really isn't going to cause additional rework, right? Because that's what we need to think about. When we first talked about moving to the cloud, particularly within the Infor applications, it's been a long time coming. For finance and supply management, we never really had that opportunity until recently. And I say recently, 5-6 years ago, that's when this was all starting, right? And we were moving forward with moving to the cloud. But we had a longer ramp to say, okay, we can do some of these optimizations now, even if they take a year or two. We don't necessarily have that long ramp right now. So that's why we want to target the window of 1 to 6 months. What we typically see from finance, right? Your optimizations. Let's start with your chart. And when organizations start looking at the chart and their smart numbering, all too often we see within those optimizations, we have smart numbered our chart. We have included cost centers and departments and locations in the numbering strings. We're using sub-accounts in a traditional manner, and not that it's wrong, but we started to break out sub-accounts because it was an easier way to pull data out of the system. So now some of the things that we can do from a finance optimization standpoint, let's really start to look at the consolidation of that chart where it makes sense, that necessary cleanup. We are finding all too often, even right now, we still have standalone databases. And when I say standalone databases, third-party systems, we might have independent asset management tracking solutions. That's typically what we see. We might have standalone lease management systems. We might have standalone spreadsheets. They are still a system if you think about it. It might not be the right way to do it in a spreadsheet, but it is how we manage to accounting oftentimes. So what do we do about bringing those things into the current Infor applications right now, because it becomes the springboard to move you to the cloud? As an example, great example, COVID-19 reporting. And we saw that a lot of organizations were not using the project accounting, the activity module, the right way. And it was a way to at least get to some of the fundamental base information that we needed to report out on when COVID hit. So we're starting to see some of these optimizations right now happen naturally because of the surrounding challenges outside of the ERP and in today's environment. I think these are the things that we can do now. If you don't have a master data management committee started, you're going to want to start those committees so that you engage with managing to your master data, understanding what it is, right? But really, how do I manage to that master data in the system now? And I think those cleanup efforts can happen, and they can certainly happen right now. Oftentimes, we see that a lot of folks have product that they just simply haven't deployed, but they own, and they're quick wins. So for supply chain, mobile supply chain, even if it's just a portion of the mobile supply chain, whether it's receiving and delivering, mobile par and cycle counting, maybe it's one module or one function within that application, that's a quick win. It's a simple deploy. It could be as quick as 2 to 3 months. Really, it isn't going to adjust your process. It's going to augment and elevate your process right now. And these are the things that you do want to target.
Yeah, on the HR side, you know, we spend a lot of time talking to folks about jobs and positions, right? And I think they're the bane of everyone's existence over the years, coming from legacy S3 for sure. But whether you're in the legacy loss and applications or not, really having a good position management. Notice I didn't say position control, I said position management. You know, you may have a job code of a manager, and then you have a position, which is, you know, the department manager. Because those things that are listed as attributes are unique to that position, and that allows us to drive all of those magical talent programs that are unique to that role in an organization. So on the HR side, you know, looking at your jobs and your positions, can you collapse your jobs, expand your positions? Of all of the attributes on a position, everybody jokes about it, but it sticks. I tell them use the Sesame Street rule, right? If one of these things is not like the other, it's a new position. I've got actually a webcast on our website that you can go and watch about the fundamentals of jobs and positions that will walk you through that. But that one takes the most time. And, you know, you mentioned smart coding. And I think there was a day where that was the appropriate way to do it, and it worked great. But now think about the last bullet point on here. When we put all of this data in the hands of people who are just coming into our organization, they don't have the keys to the secret decoder ring, right? So we have to be able to use words and not this magical code that we put together for our positions. So we have to unravel that smart coding. So you can start now, you know, dump all your code and description into a spreadsheet and start trying to create unique position titles for these folks that make sense to move away from that smart coding, so that when you do move to the cloud, you don't have to spend the time doing that, and you've come up with basically your standard definition of how you name positions, so that people really understand what they are and where they are. And the big thing on the HR side is the reporting, right? There's a chapter in my book around reporting, and I think it's so important because, you know, we have tons and tons of reports. We've got regulatory reports, we've got ad hoc reports, we've got monthly, weekly, daily, whatever we're doing for people, and sometimes they tend to be all over the place. There's a lot of different ways to do reporting in CloudSuite. It can be a simple list view kicked out to a spreadsheet because I need to look at the data and maybe I want to put some charts and graphs on it. It's analytics. It could be, you know, I'm sending it to another system because I'm using, you know, Burst or something on top of it and doing some heavy data analysis. But what we find when we have these conversations is the spreadsheets, the Access databases, the magical stuff that lives on everybody's computer. I once heard it referred to as Nicole's magic, right? So Nicole takes the data, crunches it, and sends it out to everybody. Well, if Nicole wins the lottery, there goes your magic, right? So that RICE document that we'll talk about in a little bit is important. Just understanding what data people are getting at, what they need it for, how often they need it, and who gets it, because that's going to really go to the tools that you're going to use in the Infor CloudSuite set. And the other thing that you can start doing right now too is to think about your training and change management. You know, we talk about it kind of being one of the things that is always thought about secondary, but it should be one of the first things that you think about is this is a big change. And if we're putting things in the hands of people, we're going to change the way they interact with the software. We're going to change their process, their role, their fundamental role might change. So what does that look like? And you can really kind of start your training matrix by saying, for this process, who would be affected if we made changes, right? And just create yourself a little matrix. And then start working on your change management plan. Start thinking about it. This is the one thing that I always think that people forget, and it really has to start at the very beginning of your project when you're planning, that you know how these changes are going to affect people. And that user experience is going to be huge, right? So what are you going to need or want? And that goes back to the training matrix of that user preferences, right? Are they going to be sitting in front of their computer? Are they going to be walking through the warehouse? Are they going to be in a department, without a computer all day long? So, just being able to understand their perspective of where they're coming from and meet them where they are from the workplace perspective. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts of ERP. How's that? I'll talk a little bit about the do's, and I'm going to let Donna handle the don'ts. I get to do the fun stuff, right? It's HR. But I think it's really important. We talked about this not being an IT project, and I can't stress that enough. The business owners are the folks who really have to be engaged as you move to CloudSuite. There's a lot of delivered functionality as far as workflows, routing, and approvals. And you really need to have an understanding of what those processes are, not only from your company's processes, but you've got regulatory things that have to happen, compliance things, audit things that have to happen. And so really having those business owners come to the table and be involved and be those sponsors on this project and leading the charge and guiding that with that vision of what they see for their organization. And make sure that you're using a sound proven methodology, right? The devil's in the details. And there are so many things to set up in these applications. You want to make sure that you're, regardless of who's doing your implementation, that there is a sound methodology and you can see the level of detail that is going to be looked at, because you don't want to miss some of the important things from a setup perspective. Or there might be features that, you're not even aware of that are truly powerful and kind of happening behind the scenes. And then really create that thoughtful rollout strategy. Think about not only the product itself, we talked about the program, think of it holistically, right? If we start, you have to start with global HR, for example, in HR, and then your talent stuff. But where you get the power of doing this, when you think through that rollout strategy, is think about the first phase being about your core operations and maybe some of the transactional things that you do that are somewhat expensive if you're doing them manually. Donna gave us some statistics a few minutes ago that were pretty significant. It's costing $200 to issue a PO. That's pretty expensive. So how do we reduce the cost of these transactions? That whole first phase, first wave of what you're doing has to be about that operational excellence. And then your second phase can be, in HR, we talk about it being about career and talent and doing all the goals and performance and really getting our talent programs off the ground and having a focused effort around those talent programs. So just think about what your steps are going to be to get to that nirvana of using these tools and where you want to be programmed, right, operationally. And then really think about where you can realistically do these little sprints. So we hear about all the implementation methodologies. Figure out where the right place is to sprint, right? You don't want to go so fast or so quickly that you have to go back and do rework, or that you miss something along the way that really could have driven some significant cost savings, like the routing approvals. We talked about user experience. That's a big key of this. And the end user impact, right? So not only the experience, but what does it mean for their role? Donna and I spend a lot of time looking at people's job descriptions and looking at department structures and trying to determine, what does that structure look like now that we have this new tool set, and how do people's roles change? That's a big, huge part of it. How are they going to be impacted? And so I think it's really important, as you go forward, to make sure that you have, I call it thoughtful planning, right? It's that thoughtful rollout strategy. It's the planning, it's the thinking through the steps along the way and where you want to be in the end. It's planning that trip, right? We talked about going on vacation. Planning that trip so that you are going to get there successfully and you're not going to make yourself crazy on the journey. There are feature function dependencies. For example, everyone's talking about global HR payroll, right? Landmark payroll. How do we move to payroll? Well, guess what? You need a chart of accounts. So it might be appropriate to do that in line with your finance effort. So all of those are things to think about. And it's the interoperability of these modules and suites and functions. Think business process and what you need from a process perspective. And that'll help you create that rollout strategy.
Yeah. So I think, Diana always gets the happy part, the exciting, right? She always gives me the folks with the unhappy, right? She always gives me the folks with the unhappy face. No, just kidding. So really, let's talk about the don'ts of ERP. So you all have been attending Inforum, and we're hearing about, look, folks want to be able to move to the cloud quicker. They want to be able to achieve those realized benefits sooner. But I think we need to understand what the timeline and how long it will take to do some of these projects. The number one question we get is, hey, Diana, Donna, what's the difference between a migration and a conversion, right? And that's a pretty significant question, and it's something that you need to ask. So a migration means that I'm simply not transforming data, right? I'm not transforming who I am. It means that I am moving from one system to the next system, assuming that both systems have the same table structure, the same fields, the same functionality. So that's a pretty significant strategy. And it means you can move a lot quicker, right? But for organizations that need a conversion, what that means to them is, you know what, maybe I'm 400 GL companies and I need to consolidate down to 4. Or maybe I'm 4 and I need to expand to 40. And what that means is there is no simple way to transform or move that data. And I think that is something that really defines the overall timeline of our projects. We want to move fast. We want to move with agility, right? Infor has their agility program, but we also need to understand and estimate an accurate timeline, especially for those organizations that might not fit, right, the 60% of the core process, meaning the process isn't going to change. You can assume a process or a business practice right out of the box, right out of the chute. And I think we really need to take a look at that. And that is a defining factor. Global Ledger affords us new opportunity, but it also affords us the opportunity to transform how we were processing data previously within the Infor application. In the midst of all of this, right, our folks are going to raise their hand and say, yeah, this is great. Don't expect me to do my day job in this project. And where's my resource plan? And how are we going to operationalize this? So I think one of the things that we have been able to articulate and do very well with our customers is to give them a realistic, detailed resourcing of what it takes to do these projects, right? And what it takes to manage to the program. And if you do that, it also sets up what your operational model will be like in the cloud. And I think that's also very important to realize. If folks feel like they can't get their day job done, they're really not going to actively engage in the project because they're stressed. And that's what we want to avoid. All too often, right? And Diana talked about this, we sprint where we can. And folks get in a room and they say, yep, we agree to this standard process. This is fabulous. I love this approach. But it's the wrong people who don't do the work.
Right.
Right? And it's the worst thing that we can do with implementation accelerators and the tools that are in front of us. I'm not saying that these tools are bad, but we need to make sure we just simply have the right people who do the job that can validate the tools and the processes that we are putting forward to move faster are reflective of the organization as a whole. Because oftentimes the average person doing the work has a different view and a different take than what their executives or their leadership team may have. I think the last one is so key. Don't revert to the old way of doing ERP. As an example, we never touch the production environment. Well, we're moving to the cloud. We want to touch the production environment as many times as possible, which goes to defining and articulating your environment strategy for the entire project. We always were very fearful during projects of, oh my gosh, now a new patch came out, I have to go back and retest, it's going to set us back, right? We spent a lot of time in the old way of doing ERP and effort, managing to the stress of always having to go back and test. I liken this to it's frozen. We've just got to let it go. It's sing the song and know that when we move to the cloud, it's going to happen whether we like it or not. And if we let go of that, and if we trust in our colleagues, our counterparts, if we trust in the software, then it becomes much easier to manage into the new way of ERP in the cloud. And we can concentrate and take our efforts elsewhere.
Yeah. Hey, Donna, I want to jump ahead a little bit because we're getting towards the top of the hour, and I want to talk about some things that folks can start doing today, and want to talk about how maybe roles and responsibilities might change and some things that are important as people start planning. And then I want to get into talking about that project team, right? Because that's where the success happens.
Yeah. So I think, it's really important, and we do this on every proposal, every statement of work. We want to be able to give you really the RACI, who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed. And I think it's a way so that folks understand their expectations. But moving to the cloud, it's exciting for the functional teams, and it's a new way of life for our IT teams that basically enable the business. And one of the things that we have found that is very successful is when we start these engagements, we really want to look at those IT RACIs, specific to how the IT team processes, because their way of life and what they're about to take on moving to the cloud probably is the most dramatic from a change perspective. The Infor operating OS platform has just such tremendous power and new tools and a lot to learn from. And I think clearly defining that IT RACI for the project and post go live really helps to define the overall program so that we don't have any questions about, well, should the functional team do this work? Should the technical team do this work? Who manages onboarding of a user, and how do we manage that through the life cycle of our system? And I think that's really critical to how we manage to the cloud.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It really does. We talk about it takes a village, right? There's three people in the relationship. It's your implementation partner, it's Infor, and it's you as the business owner. I want to jump to the details here real quickly because it does take a group of people to pull this off and really be successful. So I want to talk a little bit about how you put together your project team, because I think it's the most important aspect of a project is you have to figure out who your project team members are going to be, and I always tell people, this is not your, it's like Rudolph, right? Guess what? We're only 3 months from Christmas. I can say it. It's not Rudolph and this is your island of misfit toys. You've got to have people that have tribal knowledge, that can work decisions through the organization, communicate at all levels in the organization, and really, help drive some of this change. They have to be well organized and really just have to be the right folks for the team. And, you touched on it earlier, but I think that's the big key is you can't be expected to do your day job and then, oh, by the way, you've got this full-time project role too. So, can you talk a little bit about the alignment that happens when you put together a cohesive project team that involves those three parties?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, it's really simple. Number one, you have to include Infor. And when we include Infor at the project sponsor level and at the executive level. And that's a requirement for all of our teams. It just makes it so much easier. And I think managing from a PMO to a PMO perspective, whether it's our PMO and the customer's PMO, but understanding how that matches up. Mm-hmm. And then really identifying those individual resources and how they roll up. All too often, we define members of the project team, but we don't clearly define how the project team itself interacts from a roll-up strategy and a perspective. And I think the other thing too is remember that your project teams are not just simply people sitting around that don't have anything else to do and we just simply put them on this project. We really have to be thoughtful about the folks that we deploy to our projects. They might be people that have a different perspective. They might be, members of an organization that really think about the user experience before the application itself, and that may be something to think about. I think you always want to look for those individuals that have that ability organically to look at the big picture, but also scale down to the detail so that they understand both. I don't think that you want to look at your projects and simply include people as resources just because they simply are doing the job right now and they have the intuitive knowledge. While we want to include those folks, we want to think a little bit differently about these projects. And we've done that internally at ROI as well. Even from a PMO perspective, we are training a PMO really from the ground up, rather than the folks that have always been in a PMO and the Infor space for 20 or 30 years. We're doing it for this reason, that they spend the 3-4 years with Diana and I and others in the organization so that they understand how to put the teams together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that makes a huge difference too, because, I always tell the PMs, you are the CEO of this project, right? You're the ringleader. So you've got to have those skills and understand how all of these parts fit together. Speaking of the parts, I want to just take a few moments to talk about RICE. We do have a separate presentation around RICE that y'all can tune into, but it can be a simple exercise of start cataloging your reports, your interfaces, your customizations, your extensions, your workflows, right? Anything that you've done, put a category on them, start logging them into a worksheet. So those are some things that are really important in your planning phase. They're also important when you're scoping your project, because a large portion of that expense could be those technical components. And if you have the skills, great, saves you some money. If you need to get the help, you're going to have to account for that in your budget. But here's what you can start doing now, right? So let's get to the heart of what you can start doing now. On the HR side, take a look at your HR codes, all of those status codes, user fields, all of that stuff. If you're not using them anymore, inactivate them, clean up any records. Job codes and positions, we always talk about this one. Make sure all those attributes are used correctly and up to date. Your defaulting rules, turn on the defaulting where it's appropriate, use it wisely. Think about how your positions might have to expand if you're locking things down and really truly creating a position template. I hear a lot of folks talking about supervisor codes and supervisor structures, making sure from the first perspective that you know which positions are supervisory roles, and then who are those people that are in those roles. Of course, pay codes and deductions. I think this one should usually be in pretty good shape. But if we've got, hundreds and hundreds of them, do we really need hundreds and hundreds of them? Are we trying to do reporting, or are we doing something crazy just, to make reporting easier for us and we could get around it another way? So we have to look at that with an objective eye. That RICE inventory takes time, and this is where you're going to find the hidden access databases and worksheets and all of the little creative things the HR folks have done to get their job done that they still use, and we want to still enable those capabilities for reporting, but we've got to account for where all of that stuff is. And then this is a big one, and you can start doing this today, and even if you're on parts of CloudSuite, do this. Standardize your policies and programs. If you've grandfathered in things because you've done an acquisition, now's the time to start thinking about getting everyone on a consolidated set of benefit plans, getting everyone on a consolidated set of time off plans, really being able to standardize your policies across your organization, because that's the only way that you're going to drop some of that administrative cost. Donna, you want to talk real quick about the finance and supply chain side, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
Yeah, and so obviously we've got what we can start doing now on the slide, but there's something and a very simple exercise. Those folks that are fast approaching, what do I do with a global ledger, right? Strategy. How do I manage to my dimensions? What does it mean? Here's a very simple exercise, and it's pretty fun. So we distribute a lot of information and reports and data to folks, and we normally catalog those reports, right? So if you go ahead, did this at several customers, we simply took all of the reports and we found kind of the unique groupings of how they distribute and disseminate information. And we piled it up on the floor. And we found that, okay, yes, I want to look at reports by location or cost center. Okay, great. That's pretty much key that, you might have a dimension. We find that folks, especially when we start looking at inpatient, outpatient for our healthcare folks, okay, yeah, I definitely want to look at that. And that's how I report. Care provider. Yep, I report on the care provider. Maybe I start looking at it by a project, right? Great. That probably is a dimension. If I process within the organization, and this is a quick win, if I'm utilizing intercompany billing right now, that's going to be a dimension. And I know a lot of folks get very nervous about, I'm not sure what my dimension strategy should even be, what it looks like. But once again, if we just simply take and catalog the day in the life of what we do from a reporting perspective from finance, believe it or not, you'll be about 80% to where your logical dimensions should be. And it's really that simple. And we found it as a fun exercise. But I think the other thing, let's be realistic about the data that we have in the system. Is it truly reflective of us? Is it accurate? Does it need to transform? And if that data does need to transform, let's identify who owns it, because oftentimes we might not be the owner of the data in the ERP. We're just simply using it as a pass-through. It happens a lot in supply chain. So let's go ahead and work with those teams before we move to the cloud and start the process. It's that simple.
So on that front, Donna, just a little shameless plug for your white paper. If you go out to roihs.com, there is a white paper out there. If you click on thought leadership, you're going to get to all of the goodies. We've got the teams are blogging, lots of good experience from the folks that are on the front lines, and the decoding of general ledger, right? So it talks about the global ledger, those dimensions, and what you need to think about how to optimize that. Great white paper for anybody who's looking for a little reading if you're interested in going to CSS. On the HR side, we've got new material in the ebook, Embracing HR Innovation. There's a whole new chapter, there's lots of updates, and then in the back of this is I call it your Cosmo quiz. If you want to kind of take a health check on how you're doing in HR, there is a little quick quiz in the back of each of these for you to take on each of the disciplines of HR. And then again, the blogs and videos and webcasts and things that we've been talking about all throughout are there as well. We've got some of those items in the chat box that you can click on the link and get directly to it. So, I want to open it up. I know we're a little bit over time, but we've had a great dialogue today, and I want to open it up for anybody that has questions. Once again, if you want to type something in the chat, Danielle, if you want to go ahead and we can unmute anyone that wants to ask a question, and we can just do a quick Q&A for a few minutes. Hey, Donna, I got one question here coming in. Why should we even consider the cloud? That's a great question.
It is. So, we opened up a poll on our virtual booth, and there were quite a few folks that came through the poll and said, I'm not really even interested in the cloud, or I don't foresee us moving in the next 6 to 12 months. As part of the program, we have to be aware of our surroundings. And once again, from a technology perspective, if we're aware of what's going on in the ecosystem, Microsoft has put out some very strong verbiage and decommission notices just in general. Oracle did, right, back in the day with Java. And really, those are the types of things that drive why we should be moving to the cloud. So if you're not making this press for 2023 based on what other organizations are putting out there with their strategies, regardless of what platform you're utilizing in your Infor space right now. For those customers that are premise or maybe single tenant, you really need to look at those announcements, because that will define the strategy of moving to the cloud for you. So really, that 2023 number is pretty significant.
Yeah, and that's a good point. That really has to factor into your planning. And so another question that's related to that I'm seeing is, what's the best way to ensure that we don't miss anything in our planning? Well, obviously you and I, do this a lot with customers. We sit down and go through all the important things that go into that plan. So that's always there. We're here. I think when someone says, hey, what do you think your passion is? I think I found mine years ago when I kind of fell into HR. And, here we are 3 decades later, but it really is something that I enjoy, is working with folks to help put together those plans and really having some thoughtful strategy. Can't reiterate that enough. Whether it's HR, finance, supply chain, you're doing all three, you want to do all three, just engage us in that conversation so that we can help you with that plan, right? Even if you are still at the point where you're putting together budgetary numbers and needing to get to your business case, we can help you with that and help you formulate what that is so that you don't miss anything, right? Donna, we're a little bit over. I'm going to go ahead and go forward here. I'm going to put up our contact information. So that's there. If anybody wants to jot that down, please feel free to reach out to us. Brent, you want to close us out? We could be talking all day. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. Thank you everybody for attending, and thank you, Diana and Donna, for the conversation. This is a huge topic. We've tried to do this in an hour before, and it always takes longer than that. So, want to again thank you all for attending. If you'd like to discuss this in more detail, please let us know. You've got our contact info there. Some of you are already engaged with us, so we're already having these discussions. But if we aren't talking already, let's start talking about it. As Donna or Diana mentioned, actually, the thought leadership page, there's a lot of stuff out there that would probably be of interest to you, and other things if you cruise around our website that we might find handy. So with that, I will close this up for the day. Thank you again, and hopefully we'll be talking to you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.